Well, hello, Church Online. My name is Nithin. I have the honor of serving as the lead pastor in City Alliance Church in Williamsport, Pennsylvania. We're actually right in the middle of a series called #BlessWilpo, because as a church, we believe that God has blessed us spiritually, financially, and relationally to be a blessing to our city here in Williamsport. And we have been exploring the acronym BLESS, which is really giving us 5 tools we need to be a blessing to the city that we're in. So we start out the series by talking about B, which stands for begin with prayer. Anything we do has to begin with prayer. In fact, as people, we're praying and asking God for perspective and direction, for hope. And one of the things that we looked at when we kicked this off is that Jesus began with prayer, but he always ended with action. And then last week, we looked at L, which stood for listen. Listen to the people that God has placed in your life. This could be family, friends, coworkers, neighbors, or people that maybe you walk to school with or that you see in the gym. What are their struggles, their joys, their dreams? In fact, Jesus' brother James reminds us, everyone, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to be angry. You know, as one of the Stoic philosophers said, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we should be listening twice as much as we speak. And we have been listening to our community, and we are responding by doing a special event on June 26, 2022 called CityServe. Rather than meeting as church as usual, we're actually going to be getting out of our seats and into the streets to tangibly bless Williamsport. We'll gather together at 9 a.m. for a short talk and then begin with prayer. Then we're going to head out. So we won't have 2 gatherings that week or City Kids. We are actually going to be going out. We're going to be partnering with 5 different organizations that are making our city a better place. Organizations like Dwell Orphan Care, Family Promise, the YWCA, Soul Regenerative Truth. They're all working to make our city better. Then we're going to end our time by having a neighborhood picnic. We are going to throw a party on the block. We're going to invite all of our neighbors to come out and join us for this cookout in Flanagan Park by Fire Tree Place. And as of right now, we have over 50 people signed up, which is awesome, but we have room for you. So if you have not signed up yet, I want to encourage you, go to cityalliance.org/CityServe and sign up. You'll see the 5 different opportunities and the skill level for them. You can sign up your family, sign up your city group. If you don't have a city group, that's okay. You can go alone, but invite somebody, because friends don't let friends serve alone. And guys, when we wrap this event up by eating together, it's not just a reward, but it's actually a chance to practice biblical hospitality, which is an element we're going to look at today called eating together. Now, guys, I have a confession to make. I hope we can keep this between the 2 of us. Sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I'll pull out my cell phone and I'll click my TikTok app and I'll start scrolling. And the other day, my wife, she caught me scrolling on my phone. She pulled it away, and she saw my hidden obsession. My hidden obsession is this. I go on TikTok and I watch people make food. It actually is becoming a problem. Like, I can get stuck in this hole where I'm just watching people make food, all these recipes on TikTok, one after the other after the other. It becomes an issue. Now I'm doing it on Instagram. Now I'm doing it on Facebook. It really is becoming an issue that I'm working through, so you can pray for me. But one of the things I've learned is that food and TikTok really is like peanut butter and jelly. In fact, right now, there's this phenomenon on TikTok called food TikTok or food talk. These are like 30-second to 1-minute videos of really good food that is easy and accessible. In fact, it's going viral. These videos aren't being made by Gordon Ramsay or Wolfgang Puck or Sarah Pickney, pick your favorite chef, or any Food Network hack. They're actually being made by 19 and 20-year-olds. They're being made by Gen Z, and they're becoming these fast and up-and-coming folks. Now, they never went to restaurant school. They're not classically trained, but they know how to make these fun videos that make you think, hey, I can make that. And this trend really blew up, as you can imagine, during the pandemic. Everyone's at home, they've got nothing to do, and they've got all these recipes, and they've gone viral, and maybe you've seen some of them, things like whipped coffee or feta pasta. But I'll tell you what, I really enjoyed Nguyen's videos. I mean, this is a picture of this guy. I mean, take a look at this picture. Like, this dude, he's got his phone in his mouth, and he's like, making his video like that. Like, I'm just like, this guy is really working hard for it. In fact, I want to give you a little taste, a little sample of food TikTok. Check out this video.
야, 내가
Listen, if you are in a noodle mood, there is a pasta talk, then this looks really good, right? This video has over 2 million views. In fact, Newton has over 270 million followers that are watching his videos, seeing his recipes, and making them. So if you want to be a food star, don't go to school for it. Just start making videos. In fact, New York Times just covered this phenomenon, and in the article, they had this really interesting quote that kind of reveals the deeper motivation behind it. It says this: food creators said they wanted to communicate to their audience that anyone could cook good food, for regardless of background or budget. So if you really think about it, if you really peel back the layers, the motivation for this is simplicity. Simple food. You don't have to be fancy. You don't have to have Michelin stars to enjoy or make a really good meal. I really think that's the beauty about the table. It's about simplicity. And when we eat together around the table, it really is pointing us back to this very simple, maybe even like primal way of understanding what happens when we eat together. When we eat together, it's like our defenses go down. We engage in honest dialogue and conversation, and we try to find common ground. But there's something that happens as we're eating together that's powerful. In fact, families that eat together 5 to 7 times a week, the kids do better in school, it reduces obesity, and they have a 35% chance of actually reducing eating disorders down the road. There's power when we can eat together. And guys, listen, you know that. I'm preaching to the choir right now. I remember talking to our founding pastor, Spencer Sweeting, about City Alliance Church and some of the origin stories. And one of the things he told me is that City Alliance Church is actually founded around the table. You know, when City Alliance first started, and some of you guys were around for this, you know that they would have a gathering, and then after the gathering, what would they do? That's right, they'd have a meal. And when that weekly gathering got too big, it became a monthly meal. And then when that got too big, it became a quarterly meal. In fact, we're moving into picnic season where we're going to have another celebratory meal again. And that's the power of sharing a meal together. Our church has really grown out of this place of coming around the table in fellowship with one another. Which brings me to the title of today's message: Who's coming to dinner? If you're sitting next to someone, ask, who's coming to dinner? Who's coming to dinner? Ryan, who's coming to dinner today? You know, as Jesus followers, we're called to have an open space, open room at the table, where we're making space for the last, the lost, and the least. In fact, a spot at the table for those who maybe can't return the favor, can't return an invite. But the longer we're followers of Jesus, the harder it is for many Christians to have friends who aren't believers. In fact, this is interesting. I was talking to a guy who had been a believer for a number of years, and I was asking him, hey, what challenges do you have with reaching some of your friends who don't know Christ, who aren't Christians? And he says, well, I don't actually think I have a lot of non-Christian friends. I mean, most of the people I hang out with are from my city group or from church. And honestly, there's so much energy I put into just, taking care of my family and all that once I finally get, take care of work and family and parenting, I don't have any energy anymore to connect with other people. I just don't have that bandwidth. Another friend of mine was telling me that she's an introvert. She's like, Nithin, I do not, I just get so tired. And the truth is, I really don't need anyone. I don't think I have the capacity to host a meal, to host a party. I mean, what do I do with people who don't share the same vision or values that I have? And honestly, it's exhausting when I do that. And then another person that I was talking with telling me that, Nithin, it's just overwhelming thinking about getting my house ready, cleaning my house, figuring out the meal that I'm going to make that's going to make everyone happy, making sure everyone's comfortable, trying to figure out if the kids are going to get along with my kids are going to get along with their kids. I just don't even like having people coming over my house. And the truth is, that's reality, isn't it? We always have this gravitational pull towards those who hold the same views that we do, the same values, and even the same worldview that we do. And that's okay. But Jesus is inviting you and I to extend the table. Jesus invites us into an abundant life, and often that means this. To have an abundant life means that Jesus is going to call you out of your comfort zone and into your growth zone. So how can we invite people that Jesus invites to the table? The people considered the last, the least, and the lost. You see, when you extend the table, you actually extend your heart. That's really what Jesus is trying to get at. And so today, I want to look at a story where Jesus is sharing a meal with some folks that may be surprised and shocked the people in his culture. But Jesus was extending his table and actually revealing God's heart through that. So go ahead and turn to Matthew 9:9-13 if you have a Bible. Otherwise, just follow along with me. I'll take you through it. But I want to let you know who Matthew is if you don't know. Matthew was actually one of Jesus' biographers. He was actually one of the OG disciples, and he's about to share his origin story with us. And at this point, Jesus has kind of been collecting a rather strange and eclectic group of disciples or students. These folks, they're all over the place in terms of spiritual maturity, political and religious ideology, and all sorts of other stuff. They are a motley crew, yet they're all united in following Jesus. And so Matthew is writing about how he started to follow Jesus, and his journey is a radical one because most people would look at a guy like Matthew and think, he's really not leadership material. Like, he should not even be teaching the toddlers in kids' church. Why is he a disciple? Well, let's see why. It says this: as Jesus went from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. So let me kind of set the scene a little bit more for you here. Jesus has just left his hometown, and he's on his way. I think he's going to a synagogue, and he spots a tax collector's booth, and this guy Matthew is just sitting there. And Matthew's a little bit like, what's going on here? Because here's this famous up-and-coming rabbi inviting me to follow him? That's kind of weird. And this is pretty radical too, because he just walked up and out of his job. Matthew's this tax collector. Tax collectors were actually seen as the worst of the worst by ancient Jews. You see, Israel had been conquered and occupied by the Romans. And while most Jewish people wanted the Romans removed by any means necessary, tax collectors were a little bit different. You see, these Jews that were tax collectors were actually cooperating and colluding with the Romans. And they were collecting taxes for the Romans so that they would actually shake down other Jews by charging them more than they would others. Often what they would do is if the Romans said, go collect $25 from all the other Jews, they would say, hey, I want $100. And they would pocket the 75 and give Rome the 25. So they were very wealthy, they were very well off, and they were also protected by the power of Rome. So they were hated by Jews. These are the kind of guys where, if they see you coming, if you see them coming one way, you would cross the street and go the other way. But Jesus looks at Matthew, and rather than running away from Matthew, walks right towards him and invites him to follow him. And I bet you this caused a stir among all the disciples. I'm sure they're like, Jesus, what are you doing? Do you know who this guy is? Like, do you know what he's done? He's extorted millions of dollars from our people. He's ripped them off here and there. People had to move out of their houses, all this kind of stuff. But Jesus saw Matthew for who he was, and he invited him to come follow him. So Matthew has a dinner party for Jesus. It says in verse 10, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. Guys, I like to think about something here. I love this point of the story, that Jesus got invited to a party of sinners and tax collectors. Like, pause for a second here. Sinners and tax collectors, okay? What kind of people get invited to parties with sinners? Fun people. Fun people get invited to parties. Jesus was fun. Jesus was a guy that had a good time. He liked to have a good time. And these sinners and tax collectors, they wanted to be with Jesus. How many religious people do sinners want to hang out with? Usually it's the opposite. But clearly Jesus had a connection with these sinners. He had a connection with these tax collectors. But the ones he didn't have a connection with were the ones that were the most judgmental of it. And that was the religious leaders, and they're about to basically blow up this party. It says in verse 11, when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? You see, in the ancient world, eating with people was deeply intimate. You didn't just eat with anybody. When you ate with someone, it's like they were family. It's like they were a part of who you were. And so, because when you ate with someone, you drop your defenses, you would open up about your hopes, your dreams, your joys, your fears. You'd be vulnerable with them. And that act was only reserved, according to the Pharisees, to the ritually pure, the spiritually pure. The religious leaders is what they would thought. So they were deeply offended when they saw Jesus, this rabbi, engaging with people that they thought didn't deserve it. And so here's what happened. Jesus overheard the Pharisees coming after his disciples. So Jesus says this, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Jesus, I think, is outlining to the religious leaders his mission. His mission was to prioritize the last, the least, and the lost. Jesus didn't prioritize meals with kings, with politicians, with leaders, but with tax collectors and sinners, the people that the world threw out. But Jesus invites these followers to join him on his mission and also prioritizes them. But as I said before, the longer you follow Jesus, what often happens is we have fewer and fewer non-Christian friends in our lives. We easily start to drift towards people that are more like us, either more conservative or more liberal. They have the same views as us. Sometimes they're the very people that live in our neighborhoods, like we have the same socioeconomic breakdown. But if we want to be intentional about blessing our neighbors, our cities, our communities, maybe even the people that aren't like us, we actually have to intentionally fight against this drift. Resist the drift. Go ahead and say that with me. Resist the drift. And Jesus shows us 3 ways that we can resist the drift in this passage. And this is what's going to help us open our homes and our hearts to the last, the least, and the lost. The first is to look outward. Have a posture of looking outward. And Jesus is the master of this. Look what it says in verse 9. It says, as Jesus went out from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. Jesus was on the move. Guys, he had a mission. And his mission was, he was very intentional about looking around and seeing who are the folks that are furthest away from God. And Jesus gave this man, Matthew, a really simple invitation. Hey, follow me. Jesus had his eye out for the last, the least, and the lost. The question I have is, do we have that perspective? Think about what you do and where you go during the week. Who are the people that you bump into? Maybe when you go to the store, is there someone that you see on a regular basis? When you go to the gym, do you know the attendants? Do you know them by name or by sight? Do you know, are you paying attention for them? Listen, there are people all around you that God has brought to you to bless. Start with the people that God has already placed in your life. You don't have to go across the country, but just look around you. And then begin to intentionally invite them. It wasn't an accident that Jesus was at a party in the story. I mean, look what it says in verse 10. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. Jesus chose intentionally to be with the worst of the worst, with sinners and tax collectors. And he was intentional about inviting them to eat with him. And I can understand that this is challenging because when we start to pray about who we should invite and who we should invest in and who we should reach and who we should invite to our homes for dinner, that's when all the excuses come to mind. And some of them are really good excuses. They're legit. I know maybe some of you are thinking like, Nithin, if I'm honest, I really don't want people over my house. Like, I'm not a great cook. I'm not a great housekeeper. It's not really like my thing. Totally get that. I know some of you are thinking, well, I don't really know what to say. I'm not great at conversation. I'm more of an introvert anyway. Or maybe it's just like, Nithin, don't have time. I don't have time. I'm always on the go. I'm always eating on the go. But if we're intentional, we can actually find ways to do that. So maybe you don't like having people over your house. Maybe you're not a great cook. You could meet people at a restaurant. You could meet them at a park. If you're like, hey, you know what, I don't really want to cook, you can order out. And that is actually a way that you can intentionally invite people and focus on the relationships, not on all the other stuff. Or maybe you're an introvert and the idea of hosting a dinner party is exhausting. Well, then don't host a dinner party. What about one person? Maybe there's one person in your life that you can invite out to coffee. Maybe there's one person that you can say, hey, you want to go to Panera and get a meal? It doesn't have to be a whole group of people. It can just be one person. And if you're an introvert, you can ask God, will you give me the energy to reach one person? Or maybe you're afraid of, Nithin, what will I talk about? What if I don't have anything else to say? Listen, I'm an extrovert, but that happens to me too. So I'm going to share with you something that I never share with anybody. I'm going to share with you my cheat sheet when I'm in conversations. You ready? Here are some things that you can ask when you are stuck in a conversation. Things like, so where did you grow up? What kinds of jobs have you had in your career? What do you do for fun? What are your dreams for the future? Where did you meet? If you're talking to maybe a couple, you can ask them that. And there's always a great story there. I remember one time I was meeting with a guy at my church who I pretty much thought I knew pretty well. And I asked him, so tell me like places where you've lived. He's like, well, I've lived in Kuwait. And I was like, whoa, pause. How did you get to the Middle East? And it was a fascinating conversation. Don't just take for granted the people that you're having a conversation with. In fact, here's what you can do. You can go back and take a screenshot of that slide, keep it in your smartphone. That's what I do. I have this in my smartphone, so I know how to have those conversations. But if some of you are like, all right, well, that's great, Nithin, but listen, I don't have time. I get it. We're all busy. But here's the thing. We all have to eat, right? We all have some sort of scheduled times of eating throughout the day, throughout the month. most of us have it scheduled 3 times a day to eat a meal, right? That's like 21 meals a week. This is something that actually Jackie and I do. Actually, I should say Jackie's really good at this. She's always good at taking 1 or 2 meals and say, hey, we're going to go see some friends. Hey, we're going to have a meal with our neighbors. Sometimes it's at a restaurant. Sometimes it's at our home. Sometimes we grab some food and we go meet someplace. But it's something that we do. And I encourage you to do it as well. And here's the thing. I got to acknowledge the reality here. It's not easy. You know what? Some of the things that it requires us to bless our neighbors, it's not going to be convenient for you. But that's okay, because the results are better. And in fact, as a church, I want to encourage us, guys, let's not be afraid to do hard things. Let's not be afraid to do hard things, because when we do hard things, that's the place where we actually grow our faith. And when you break bread with people who are different from you, who maybe see things differently from you, you actually start to break down those walls. You actually start to understand where they're coming from. The echo chambers dissolve when you're able to do that. So if you want to bless our city, do it by intentionally inviting to eat with others. But when you start to do that, you need to understand this, and this is the third principle here. It's this: put people before problems. Put people before problems. Because here's the reality. When we start to actually live like this, it's going to be a challenge. See, the way of Jesus is messy. It's messy. You've heard, Biggie Smalls says, more money, more problems. I actually think if Biggie Smalls was a pastor, he'd be like, more people, more problems. Jesus understood this, right? He understood that people are messy. The Jewish leadership, they didn't understand that. See, the Pharisees had this belief, it was a wrong belief, that when God was going to come back, he was only going to come back when everyone was righteous, when all the Jews lived morally perfect and spiritually perfect. Because of the attitude, they put all of the emphasis on behavior and good works for people. If people didn't behave right or live the right way, they threw them out. They're like, hey, Jesus, God's going to come back. We need to have the morally perfect here. But that's not what God's will was. Jesus spent most of his time with tax collectors and sinners. Jesus literally lived at the center of the tension between grace and truth. And when the religious elite questioned Jesus and said, Jesus, what are you doing? Why are you with these people? His response is this: it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire, what's that word? Mercy, not sacrifice. For I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. See, Jesus wasn't afraid of messy people, because that's what he meant by saying, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Being around messy people means that you're going to have some messy conversations with some folks that you may not agree with. It may require that you have to lean in a little bit harder, listen a little bit harder. It might mean that you have to bite your tongue rather than defend your point and rather than win. Being with messy people means that you might have to forgive them and then follow up with your kids with a conversation that says, Mommy and Daddy don't talk like that. We don't say those words in our family because we follow Jesus. When one of your guests drops a cuss word or says something that they shouldn't say. Loving messy people means that we may need to put aside our opinions when a controversial issue comes up so we can show God's love by listening and trying to understand. And it might mean we have to resist fighting back, but model and show grace and mercy and love. I remember I learned this from a guy who I would consider one of my mentors, a guy named Rob Abrams. Rob was a guy that I went to church with him, and he was a guy that wanted to love his neighbors better. And so as we were kind of talking about this and looking at what does it mean to be on mission with Jesus, Rob started this thing at his house called Open Grill. And there was 2 rules to Open Grill. Anyone could come, but you had to bring 2 things. You had to bring a meat to grill and an adult beverage. And what he would do is his grill and his smoker would be open, and so he would be grilling up some ribs and hot dogs and burgers and chicken, and we would all be eating together. We would all be connecting with one another. And at first, it was mostly folks from our church that came because that was all that we knew. But eventually, Rob's coworkers from LL Bean started to come. The neighbors all started to come. In fact, I think everyone in the street at one point had showed up for Open Grill. And there's this one guy that started showing up, and I'm going to call him Gary because I want to use his real name. But I was kind of looking at Gary at first and going, why do I know him? Where do I know him from? Well, it turned out that Gary and I went to the same youth group when we were kids. And when I knew Gary, I would say he was pretty religious. Like, he was a straight arrow. He did love Jesus, but he was also very, kept to the rules, things like that. Well, when I met Gary at Open Grill, he was an avowed atheist. Something had happened to him when he was younger in the church. He had walked away from God. He had been deconstructing his faith and kind of came to this place of just this hardened atheism where he had wanted nothing to do with religion or spirituality. In fact, he was quite hostile. In fact, whenever we were talking, over some barbecue ribs or a burger, he would just get really hostile about spiritual things or church things. And so, I would honestly, I'm a fighter, so I want to get in it with him. But, Rob was saying, maybe instead of arguing with him, you could just listen. Maybe you could actually model curiosity and ask a little bit about why he feels the way he feels. And it wasn't easy, and there were some really hard conversations, and he was very caustic and acidic when it came to spiritual things. But I tried that. I wasn't arguing, I wasn't fighting, I was listening, I was asking questions, and we would have some tense conversations, but I would say overall, they were good conversations, and I learned a lot. And over time, Gary got less and less hostile to things of faith. In fact, when we'd bring them up, he wouldn't be making fun of them or mocking them as much. He would be listening. And eventually, I got to hear a little bit of his story. And Gary was this guy who he really wanted to go into ministry. He loved God and he loved people, and he was working at a church, but there was this really nasty church split that happened. There was all this spiritual abuse and emotional abuse, and he kind of saw the inner side, the underside of church leadership, and was kind of crushed by it, and it really hurt him badly. And so he completely walked away from God. And man, I remember hearing his story and just feeling heartbroken as he was kind of breaking that down. Well, he kept coming to Open Grill, and over time, something interesting happened. He started complaining about this back pain. He was going to chiropractors and all these different things. And I remember during one conversation, he was in a lot of pain, like you could see it in his face. And I just said, Gary, can I pray for you? He kind of looked at me and goes, oh, yeah, sure. So I prayed for him. I prayed for Gary right then and there. And every week when he'd come to Open Grill, I'd pray for him again. And he was open to it. Now, I wish I could tell you that, Gary rededicated his life to Jesus, and now he's an elder at his church. I don't know what happened to him as we parted ways. But it just showed me what happens when you have a meal with someone. It shows me the power of how someone can open up meal by meal. So I got to ask that question again. Who's coming over for dinner at your place? Who's coming to dinner? Is it the folks that you already know and love, people who see the world the way you do, vote like you do, look like you, think like you, believe like you? Or are you extending the table like Jesus did? Are you extending the table by inviting a Matthew to come and sit at it? Matthew was an enabler. He was enabling a corrupt government. But you know who else sat at Jesus' table? If you had Matthew over here he had Simon and Judas. And Simon and Judas were part of a group called the Zealots. You know who the Zealots were? The Zealots were insurrectionists. They wanted revolution. They were trying to overthrow the government, and they saw a guy like Matthew as a traitor. They would have seen a guy like Matthew and said, we are going to slit this guy's throat. This guy is a traitor. We want to kill him off. But yet they were at the same table. It would be like if you had a dinner party and you had a MAGA hat wearing, Trump loving Republican on one side and a progressive Democratic socialist on the other, and they were at the same table eating together. I mean, some of us, we would cringe at that. We'd be like, why would Jesus do that? Because Jesus invites us all to the table. You may have different political views. You may have different spiritual views. But our job is to join Jesus on his mission to welcome to the table the last, the least, and the lost. This summer, I know you're going to have cookouts with family and friends in your city group. But would you consider maybe extending the table and inviting the last, the least, and the lost to party with you? And what if your city group decided to throw a party and invite the whole neighborhood over? Maybe during one of your meetings, like, hey guys, instead of doing our meeting, we're going to have a party. We're going to invite our neighbors to come and party with us. And you actually modeled generous hospitality to your neighborhood. Like, what impact do you think that would have through sanctified parties? Or what if you opened your home to folks on the margins, people on the outskirts of society? I was talking with Jolene Harback, who's actually on staff with an organization called Thrive International. They're one of our partners. Thrive is an organization that comes alongside immigrants to encourage them, help them kind of navigate some of the hurdles of living in another country. And she was sharing with me that there is a family from Latin America that's been living in Williamsport for a few months, and they're eager to make friends and invest in the community. So she was sharing with me that they would love to have someone from our church extend the table to them and welcome them and to have a meal with them and let them experience Christ-centered community. But here's what I thought was even more awesome. Joel even said this. You know what they would really love? They would love the opportunity to open up their home to you, to share a meal with you. See, part of eating together means that we can actually mutually bless and learn from one another. Sometimes you can bless someone by saying yes to an invitation to their home. See, that's a beautiful picture of gospel community. When we eat together, we model the gospel. We invite people to come and join us for a meal, where there's abundant food, which reflects the abundance of God's love and grace that he showers on sinners and tax collectors that come back to him. Jesus invites us to come and join him for a meal, to eat with him, and he's full of love, mercy, and kindness. You see, when you open your home and heart by eating with others, you're actually demonstrating the gospel. Men and women get a picture of what it means to accept Jesus' invitation of abundant life, a life that runs over, where they experience God's blessing and are able to bless others. Let me pray for you. Lord, I pray for those that are watching this video right now, that you would begin to work in their heart, that they would have a heart for radical gospel-centered generosity, that they would model the gospel by holding abundant meals with folks in their lives. God, show them who those people are. Help them to invite with intention, and help them to be okay with the messiness that people bring with them. God, we love you. Thank you for allowing us to be part of your mission in your name. Amen. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching today's message. I hope it spoke to you and it inspired you. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button. That way you can stay up to date in all of our latest messages here at City Alliance Church. And if you want to partner with us to take the gospel here, there, and everywhere, go ahead and hit the give button. Your faithful tithes and offerings help us reach more people with the good news of Jesus Christ.